Good evening, everybody. I'm really happy to see quite a lot of you. It's a pleasure because the International Space Station somehow is a topic that not many people are familiar with, in my humble opinion. My name is Szabolcs Nagy. I've been attending the Baker Street Irregular Astronomers meeting in Regent's Park, where I met a lot of really nice people, and they kind of dragged me into astronomy photography, and I think that kind of paved my way to become solely an International Space Station photographer. It's possible, and I will prove you exactly how. But can I ask a question? So how many of you is familiar with the ISS, or the International Space Station? Okay, that's a lovely percentage. I like it. Before I kick off, I would like to play a video for you, just as bring the mood. This gentleman is Alexander Gerst, a German astronaut, playing a little bit of fun. So this is the International Space Station. Let me point out the beautiful shot with the moon in the background. This is a very distinctive shape. If you ever gonna see some videos, footages, this is how it looks like. I will show you later how big it is. I'll give you an idea, how to imagine how enormous, gigantic this station is. But quickly I'm gonna run through. So these are the solar panels. This is the main starboard, and this facilitates the Russian segment, the American segment, I would say, yeah, this way, and then this Japanese segment. Another beautiful shot with the sun in the background. All right, so what exactly, yes, that's some, excuse me for that. And okay, so what is the International Space Station? I have two definitions for you. The simpler is, it's a large spacecraft. So it orbits around the Earth, and it's the home for the astronauts. But if I wanna give you a little bit more complex answer, that it serves as a microgravity and space environment research laboratory in which crew members conduct experiments in biology, human biology, physics, astronomy, meteorology, Earth observation, and a quite wide spectrum of fields. So it's not just a beauty thing that we can observe in the evening, but in fact, there are lots of science actually happening there because of the microgravity. The microgravity environment gives us a very unique environment where you can do some experiments with different metals, different materials on Earth, what we can find on Earth, and then it leads unexpected results sometimes. And exactly what the purpose of it, apart from just, again, it's a beautiful thing up there. So let's just recap what happened. Once we had the Saturn V rocket that took people to the moon, basically after that we sort of retracted ourselves a bit to Earth. We stopped using this magnificent rocket simply because it was too costly. It was too expensive, basically. The space race was over, so NASA's idea was, what if we're gonna build something on a so-called low Earth orbit? So, or LEO, that's a common term to use. The space shuttle, a very technical term for that is the Space Transport System, or STS, but everybody knows as the space shuttle. Basically, there was a cargo taxi to low Earth orbit. That beautiful spacecraft enabled and give the powerful tool to NASA to actually take the International Space Station piece by piece. The Russians and the Americans came together. They had this idea that what if we build a permanent place in space where we can, we can just send people up. They can be there, make their observations, and let's see where it's going to take us. So the very first expedition started in 2000, but they started building the space station, I think, 2 years earlier. 2 years earlier, in 1998. And the first expedition members were really William Shepard and 2 cosmonauts. Just to know, Russians, they don't call it astronauts, they call themselves cosmonauts. So Yuri Gidzenko and Sergei Krikhayev. Probably my pronunciation is not perfect. Forgive me for that. Expedition 61, where we are right now. So this is what International Space Station looked like in 2000. Tiny. It was only consisting of 3 elements. On this picture 4. So the Unity module from the Americans, the Zarya, which means, I keep always forgetting, sunrise. So this was the first bit of the space station. When the Americans and the Russians docked these 2 bits, that's what we call the birth of the International Space Station. Then they added the Zvezda module, and this is a cargo vehicle, a Progress cargo vehicle. This was the Expedition 1, the 2 Russian and the American astronaut. And quite a few years later, this is how big the International Space Station grew. Also, this bit, basically you can see here Zarya, Zvezda, and the American unit. Since then, they added the Harmony module, they added the Japanese section, they added the European section. So this bit is called the Columbus. This belongs to the European Space Agency. And obviously, they added some radiators. These big white pieces basically are cooling the station. Because something, when it's exposed to sunshine in space, it can heat up incredibly. And when let's say the space station is in the shadow of Earth, then temperature drops quite dramatically. These are the solar arrays. These are basically their solar panels, and they are producing electricity for the International Space Station. Just to give you an idea how big the International Space Station is, because we are in London. I just found this photo on the internet, and probably the London Eye is a good comparison. So the London Eye, the diameter of London Eye is 120 meters. Well, the space station is 108 meters, and I think 51 meters is the width. So just imagine a double-decker is about just a bit over 11 meters. So you can line up almost 10 right in front of each other, and that would be roughly the length of the International Space Station. We can imagine it's pretty big. Right, some interesting facts. So everybody knows that they live in microgravity, so they can free float around, and you can play with liquids, and you know it's a fun environment. Let's be frank, but not many people know, and I have to tell you that when I was preparing myself for this talk, then I actually realized this fact. So where they are, around 400 kilometers above the Earth, the Earth gravitational force is still 90%, which is like, you know, it makes you think that then how come they are in microgravity if 90% of Earth gravitational force is still affecting them? Well, the reason for that is, have you ever seen a zero-G aircraft, or have you heard of it? What it does, it's a training facility for future astronauts, and what it does, it flies up and down in a parabolic way, and when it goes up and then it comes down like a roller coaster, what happens is basically the aircraft is falling, but the people on board, they are falling with the aircraft as well. So because they are falling with the same speed, they feel like they are in microgravity, because the environment that surrounds them is falling with the same speed. So they can just free float around inside. That's exactly what happens with the International Space Station. Imagine that to stay for the ISS, to stay on orbit, you need to reach this speed. That translates around just over 28,000 kilometers per hour. And it means that because of its speed, it's trying to break out from this circle. But because it's the forces, the gravitational force, is keep pulling the International Space Station towards the Earth, that keeps on this orbit. So it's keep breaking out, but they basically two forces balancing themselves out. And that's why they can permanently stay on that orbit. So this is the length and the width. And some more facts. So it's pretty big. I don't know what it says to the common people, that it's 915 cubic meter, but it's a big place. Its speed is almost 28,000 kilometers. That's about just a bit over 17,000 miles per hour. Orbital period, it means that in every 92.68 minutes, it goes around the Earth. That translates to the fact that the astronauts and cosmonauts on board, they see almost 16 times the sun to rise and set. Which is just think about it for a second, how beautiful and magnificent it could be that you see the whole Earth 16 times a day. It's just a place to be, I guess. Yes, so it's been up over 20 years, and yes, the years that it's been permanently habited is almost 19 years. It already did almost 120,000 orbits. And what does the orbital decay means? It means that although it's 400 kilometers above the Earth atmosphere is very, very thin. It's almost non-existent, but it's still there. And over the time, as it goes around, it still causes the station to slow down, just like a normal wind resistance. So every month, it drops about 2 kilometers. The space station does not have its own thrusters. It doesn't have a rocket engine on it. So what it does is the Russian Soyuz, mainly the Soyuz and probably the Progress spacecrafts, are firing their own thrusters. And what they do is they don't raise its altitude. Instead, it will increase its speed. Because in space, when you are on orbit, what you need to do if you want to go higher, further from the Earth, you need to speed up. If you want to slow down or re-enter, then you need to slow down your speed, and then Earth's gravitational field will do the job for you, basically. Right, this is the interesting bit. I'm less knowledgeable about it because I'm a photographer, but because the topic pulls the observer in, after a while you start educating yourself, basically. So some facts and research discoveries. So that's Tim Peake, by the way, our one and only astronaut who's been up in the space, and in the International Space Station. So we realized that people who are spending 6 months or more, basically they will lose considerable bone and muscle mass, and almost 60% of the astronauts who spend, again, 6 months or more, they actually show that their eyesight is deteriorating over the time. More you stay, more these effects will actually have an impact on your body. And that's a problem. We definitely cannot live in microgravity for long term, because the human body is a beautiful thing, and what it does is immediately adjusting itself to the environment. If your environment changes, your body adopts and it tries to fit in that environment. That's exactly what's happening from minute one, as soon as you hit and enter the space station. Also, they expose some bacterials outside the International Space Station, and they discovered that they either survived or their DNA survived. So there was a clue that kind of opened up the door that life might came from somewhere else, from Mars or from somewhere else, because we always imagined that something that exposed to radiation and to space, vacuum mainly, they will never survive. But some organisms actually capable of doing that. Some tardigrades, tiny little animals with 8 legs, with a big mouth in the front. It's a funny little creature. They took it up there, it came back, and it lived its life like nothing happened, basically, which is incredible. Also, they are growing crystals for medicine and cancer research. Basically, the microgravitational environment again allows them to grow protein crystals the way that we cannot do it on planet Earth. So that's again a beautiful research that they are conducting for the benefit of the whole humankind, basically. Also, they mounted, so first of all, they realized that the cosmic rays, as they enter the Earth's atmosphere, they disintegrate. So they are not observable. So if you want to observe them, you need to go to space. You go to the ISS. So they mounted this device called Alpha Magnetic Spectrometer, or AMS. And they just, from day one, they started detecting billions of cosmic ray particles, mainly electrons and the antimatter counterparts, and they just realized that there are a lot of antimatter out there. We just don't know much about it, but obviously that's gonna be something revolutionary that we're gonna read, I think, very soon. You can see the AMS on the cargo bay of the space shuttle. Right, fire on the space station. Again, it's something that different on Earth and different in microgravity. This is on Earth how a candlelight looks, and this is in space. So in Earth, the reason why we have this shape, because the process of burning is really inefficient. So it's not burning its material perfectly, plus the gravitational forces, and as the air rises, gives this funny shape. In space, things are actually burning more efficiently and with less smoke. And they discovered that when they ignited something and it goes out, the light, but actually it does not, which is a funny thing, because it means that you cannot see the fire. So it's a very, very, very tricky business, to be fair. Right, this is a video, so I just put this in the presentation. So they need to do 2-3 hours of physical activity, and also they are growing plants. Mainly we're gonna see salads, but they are actually experimenting how you can grow things in space. Obviously, this is going to be the way to actually see how we're gonna grow our own food if we go somewhere else. Because let's be frank, if you are only 400 kilometers from the surface of Earth or from civilization, it's relatively easy to send up some fresh food. But if you happen and you want to go, and we do want to go to Mars, let's say, or the Moon, then we need to work on these things, and we need to master how to grow our own food on our own spaceships or on our own bases, basically. You can see they are growing beautifully. You're gonna see them actually eating them. So, and they survived, more importantly. So it's definitely feasible, and again, this is one kind of research that just fantastic, you know, and then obviously we would like to see a whole variety of plants actually growing in certain, you know, environment. Also, eating is a funny thing in space. You need to know that they try to avoid liquidy food, and the crunchy food. Crunchy that has tiny little crumbs, because that flies everywhere. You can't control it. They are having some pizza. Italian food is extremely popular. Spaghetti, macaroni, pizza, these are all amongst the favorites. Don't ask them, if you're ever gonna meet any, don't ask them about your ice cream. They all say somehow it's terrible. The reason why all the ice cream ended up probably in the museums, like in the Natural History Museum, is because it's unedible. That's what they said. So yeah, obviously they are always trying to have fun with it. Liquid this is Chris Hadfield. He's a legend, and I love how he's gonna look what he's doing. You see, microgravity is a beautiful environment. Obviously, it does a lot of bad things to the human body, but in the same time, this is absolutely fun. This is shortbread with some strawberry and milk. And they just all stick together because of the surface tension. And you can do things like, you know, look mama, no hands, I can eat with no hands, or things like that. So yeah, it's absolutely fun. Right, how did I discover ISS? It's probably a simple answer, but this is actually how it happened. Usually people read things and then buy things. Well, unusually people buy things and then discover things. In my case, I bought a telescope from a local London telescope shop, and then I started doing some observations. And then as I got involved in certain groups and social media, then suddenly I realized that there's this thing called the ISS, you know. Usually when I do public observations and I show this to people and I say, you know, you want to see the ISS, and you can see the confusion on the faces. It's like, why are you talking about a terrorist group? And I'm like, no. This is ISS. And then people are like, oh right, okay. Because they just couldn't connect what exactly is happening. So yes, I discovered myself the International Space Station. I've seen some amazing photographs. And then I'm like, okay, I have a telescope, I have DSLR. What exactly stops me from trying to take photographs? Let me just double check the time. So yes, so then I realized that it's actually visible to your naked eye. If you know exactly when to go out, from and to times. So when is it going to rise? What's going to be the elevation? How bright is it going to be? Which constellations is flying through? Then basically you can see it yourself. And it's a pretty cool thing when you see and you know that at least 3 guys are up there permanently, and probably they are looking back at you. So it's just brilliant. So I took my first shot of the International Space Station, which looked like this. Well, I don't know what you guys see, but for me it's definitely a skiing rabbit. Here's the ski in a position like this. So when I saw it, I was like, okay, that's something is not right. But obviously it is. So this is a very overexposed photograph of the International Space Station. These are the solar panels on the side, and obviously the rest of it. Right, so what is exactly the goal of taking photographs? Well, I do believe that astronomy in general, and especially if you own or rent a telescope, it's all about your own discoveries. You are going to, so we are bombarded with amazing programs on various channels. But I can tell you, since I've been doing since 2013, since I have a telescope, every single time when I showed Jupiter or Saturn or the Moon to anybody, it doesn't matter how many documentaries they've seen, they were blown away. Space station is just one step forward. You cannot actually visually see it because it moves way too quick, and there's no way that you can move, or somebody probably moves for you and then you look through. But otherwise, it's a photographic subject. Yes, and as you see, it started as an interest, and now here I am and talking about it. So basically what it does, it pulls you in, and then once it has your attention, any topic what we like, you start reading about it, you start educating yourself about it. What is this? Why is it up there? What are they doing there? And what's happening up there? So it opens up a whole new world in front of you, basically, which I personally never imagined that exists. And obviously it's bloody interesting because we hear in the news that this has been launched, that had been launched, and Elon Musk is doing some crazy things, but it becomes your personal experience suddenly. You live it through your own memories. Right. So where to begin the observations? What you need to know is there are periods in visibility of the space station. Sometimes we can see it in the morning, before sunrise. Sometimes we can see it after sunset, and there are weeks when we can't see it at all. There are applications, luckily, that will tell you exactly when is it visible. Yes, it's called ISS detector for your mobile phone. You can even set it's going to start beeping. So yeah, it's a great help, let's be frank. And okay. Now I would like to show you, before I show you some of my photos and some stories, let me shine a light on why the ISS is observable. So it is always observable before sunrise or after sunset. The reason for that is this. I drew it, so sorry for that. But what happens, this is the sunshine, basically, coming from the sun, and this is already nighttime. The Earth is spinning, let's say, this way. And then we are after sunset, and although the sky is getting darker, because the ISS is 400 kilometers above the Earth, the sun still can illuminate it. So what gives us a dark background with a very bright object. It's almost as bright as planet Venus, which is the second brightest object after the sun. So Moon, Venus, and the International Space Station. So if you know when it's happening and if you will go out, you can't miss it. It's super bright. Right. So I will show you 3 photographs or three sessions which are my favorite since I've been taking photos. This one is related to SpaceX. I quite like them. They are kind of dividing the astro community with their new Starlink constellation. They are planning to launch about 30,000 satellites and cover the whole Earth and basically providing internet all around the globe. It doesn't matter if you are on the top of Mount Everest or in the jungle or whatever. But obviously that kind of kills off a bit deep sky astrophotography. So if you are taking long exposure photographs, because there always will be some satellites zigzagging your field of view. But what they do now is they are trying to restore America's capability to go back to space and being able to launch astronauts to the International Space Station. Because guess what? Since they retired the space shuttle, they lost the capability. And ever since they are using the Americans to go to space. So this spacecraft called the Dragon, the Crew Dragon, it looks exactly like its cargo version, but it doesn't have solar panels sticking out, and this is going to take hopefully 4 people per launch to the space station and back. So it's already been to space. You can see it's on top of it there, Falcon 9 rocket. This is a beautiful long exposure shot of the launch. This is Elon Musk with Jim Bridenstine and the 4 future astronauts. And this is just a quick recap of the launch. Why is it important? Why am I talking about this? How does it relate to the space station? So first of all, they wanted to demonstrate that it can dock to the space station. So this is where the space station is orbiting. So they are slowly raising the altitude of the Dragon spacecraft, and then it will approach and dock to this end. But you will see it's coming from an interesting angle. This is real imagery from its approach. And you could see as they were closing up the gap and eventually docked to the Harmony module. And for my biggest pleasure, I have managed to capture a shot of it docked to the International Space Station, which I'm really proud because as today, I don't know anybody else who managed to take a photo of that Crew Dragon spacecraft docked to the space station. So that was its maiden flight, and I'm really, really, really happy that it became in my book a bit of history, and I will always remember, obviously, this beautiful thing. But what does it look like exactly? This video is ending in a minute. This is what it looked like docked. This is the pressurized bit, and this is the unpressurized bit. These are the solar panels, so it's not sticking out. Instead, the whole spacecraft is covered. This is from space, the approaching tiny little capsule. This is again a view. This is again from the space station. Obviously, they kept on taking photographs of this beautiful object, being first very near to the International Space Station. That's me preparing my equipment. That's my telescope. It's a 10-inch Dobsonian telescope. And this is when I'm actually imaging. This is how I manually track the motion. And this is basically, as I take high frame rate images, these are real frames. These are real footages stringed together into an animation. And that's the Dragon, the Crew Dragon spacecraft docked to the Harmony module. On top of it, I could manage to identify Canadarm, which basically helps some of the cargo spacecrafts docking to the space station. It grabs it and it moves to the station. So again, these are absolutely conventional telescopes, you know. This is still one of the best still photo. So that's the Crew Dragon. That's one of the Progress cargo spacecraft. Sometimes you can identify certain spacecrafts on it, and this is what it looks like, and this is what we can see from it basically. Which is, again, I wasn't sure exactly what I'm gonna get, and you can imagine I was very happy when I saw it actually on my screen. So yes, that was one of my best experiences. And once it finished its job, it returned to Earth just like any spacecraft from the Apollo era or the Russians, as they returned to Earth, and it splashed down to the Atlantic Ocean. they wanted to do some tests. Sadly, they managed to blow it up. So there was some massive investigation, and hopefully next year, early next year, the first 2 astronauts will be launched to the space station. There will be just a trial mission, and after that, full on, we are heading back again to the ISS. So yes, the other one is the Soyuz MS-13 spacecraft. They are using, the Americans have to rely on the Russians to get to and from the International Space Station. This event happened to happen on the 50th anniversary of landing on the moon. 20th of July 2019. Yes, it was this year. So we just celebrated on that day the 50th anniversary that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin stepped onto the moon. So what they did, they launched the 3 gentlemen, Gianluca Parmitano, Alexander Skvortsov, and Andrew Morgan. They were up on a 6.5-hour journey to the International Space Station, and I knew it's going to be clear in London. I knew that we're going to have 2 really good flybys over London, really nice, bright flybys. So I did the setup, I went out, and I wanted to see if I can, catch them one way or another. The result was absolutely a surprise. It just happened way beyond my imagination, luckily. So what you see here is the second or the third stage, I think the third stage, separating from the Soyuz spacecraft, and then you will see the solar panels deploying in a minute, and they were just making their way to the space station. So we had one orbit when they were like, I would say a good this far away from each other. So if you could see the ISS and see, if you hold your arm out there and you do this, the Soyuz was following the ISS about this distance. So you knew that they are already close, and I knew that in 92 minutes later, when they go around them, they will be visible again, then they might be close. But we don't know the schedule, when they are about to dock, and there's just one thing, what they are planning, when they are planning to dock and when they actually docking. Sometimes they get there 10 minutes earlier, 10 minutes later. It's unpredictable. So this is what was going on in the live coverage, which I was watching and recording because I wanted to look back later at how far they were. So this is from on board, and you can see as they sort of align themselves to the right docking port, and slowly they're going to start edging forward, and eventually they do the docking, the actual docking. This was the onboard camera from the Soyuz, which I will show you one frame later. So yes, they were coming closer and closer, and obviously I was ready, and Nick, my very good friend, who we do some lectures in the same place here about ISS imaging and moon imaging. I contacted him and my very good friend also, Martin Lewis. So there were like 3 of us. Nick up in North West London, Martin Lewis in Milton Keynes with his own telescope, and myself down in Wimbledon. And we it was a nice social event. And we just waited and we just did it. And then when I look back, obviously when they arrived to the space station safe and sound, but this is what I saw when I looked it back. So you're gonna see the International Space Station, and this is the Soyuz spacecraft. This is not Photoshop. This is as it was. It's one frame. This is the distance between the 2. They were actually 10 minutes before docking. I couldn't even request any better scenario than this. And on top of it, usually they are docking here or the other side. So it means as the station orbits, so we are seeing the bottom of it. So they usually dock like this. Not this time. This time they docked here. So obviously if they're coming from underneath, then probably it's just a tiny blob or not even that. But because they were docking to this end, the Russian end, they had to go around it, and that's why you can see there's a distance between the 2. So yeah, it was totally mind-blowing. I couldn't really believe what I was seeing, because this is probably once in a lifetime. I don't even know when there's too many factors where it can go wrong. Weather, probably the most obvious in London. This is a render from NASA's website, and they always highlight what's the current setup on the International Space Station. You can always see the updated version, and they always tell you which spacecraft dock to which docking port, basically. It's just a little help if you do imaging. This is an animation because, again, just like you've seen the previous animation with all the panels, same thing. I think 5 frames stringed into a loop. So it gives a little bit of, it brings it alive. It just makes it look like it's an object. It's not just bright pixels on a dark picture. But yes, and I will show you what Martin Lewis captured after this. This is Martin's photograph. He captured the same thing. Sadly, Nick had some technical issues. Yes, because he was stayed up and he waited another 92 minutes, and luckily he has captured when it was already docked to the station. So you can see as the whole story was unfolding, and when you look back, you just have a feeling like it just meant to be like this, you know, because this is just a nice summary of the whole thing. This is what the external camera on the Soyuz spacecraft sees. All these, you know, Russian letters and obviously the numbers. But I know for a fact that this is the speed related to the ISS, and this is the distance. So because I recorded it and there was a live coverage of the docking, now we know that it was 76 meters, precisely 76 meters in the time of the photograph, what you just saw. So, you know, this is where all the informations come together. You watch the coverage, you read NASA's website, you read other people's photographs, you kind of get familiar that, you know, what docking port is where and what part of the International Space Station is where, and eventually you can put the puzzles together and you can build up a whole story, basically. And again, it becomes your own personal experience and memory, obviously. This is my scope just before the imaging. And my final story is related to Team Peake. I wanted to show something that's British, that's, you know, homegrown astronauts. We were all in Science Museum with Eric and with a couple of irregular astronomers from the Regent's Park, where I think there was Chris Hadfield and I think Professor Brian Cox hosting the event when actually Team Peake arrived to the space station. So it was a big thing when it was happening here in London. And I have a story related to this. So the International Space Station had a power distribution problem. So the electricity that was generated by the 4 big solar arrays, I would say 4 pairs of solar panels, that power was not distributed because of the faulty device. So Team Peake, just here, and Tim Copra, an American astronaut, had to conduct a spacewalk. And they had a spare one, and they had to replace this very device. So this basically, at this time, I had one of those tiny telescopes. It's a 90mm Maxtov. That's why I'm happy that we have one here, because all the others are rented out at the moment. I took a photograph with that one. And in that time, I wasn't entirely sure, you know, that it is going to have a role to play. But this is the beauty of continuously persuading one photography target, let's say. When somebody takes photographs of Jupiter, let's say, and then you discover that, you know, this cloud belt is changing and you following what's actually happening. Similar to that. So they conducted the spacewalk and they fixed the problem. I kept this video because it's quite funny how they have to get out from that spacesuit. It is a nightmare. It is a nightmare, especially after if you're conducting about 6 or 7 hours spacewalk and you lose a few kilograms of liquid of your body and you're exhausted. Probably the last thing you see, Scott Kelly, this astronaut, had to actually stand on him because in microgravity, it's not like here you pull somebody. In microgravity, if you pull somebody, you pull yourself away from that person. So it's a weird one. But I think that's part of the microgravitation environment. So yes, they conducted the spacewalk, and the reason why I showed you this is because the spacewalk was a crucial thing. So on this set of images, basically imagine that when it was, let's say, in this photo, it was, let's say, right above me, and on this photo, the ISS was there. So I kept taking images, and as the orientation of the space station, just like an aircraft, you can see the front and you can see the belly and you can see the back of it. Just like, similar, you can see that quite a lot of the solar panels, and then you can see it sort of sliding this way, and eventually they just disappear, like they are not there. They are there, but we can see them from the side instead of the surface. And you can spot that tiny little orange bit on every single photograph. I didn't really pay any attention to this because why would I? It's just, this is how it looks like, that's it, job done. But then I realized, basically, I have another photo where I marked all the little bits because in that time I was learning what is where. But I realized that this is unusual. This never happens. This was the result of the faulty power distribution. So what we see now is that all the 4 pairs should, like a sunflower, wherever the sun is, they are following the sun. And they always tilt and rotate, following the sun. But because of the problem, one half of the pair couldn't follow the sun the way the rest. So it was illuminated by the sunshine, the sunlight. And then why did I know this? Is because about 2 weeks later, I take a photograph with a bigger instrument, and then I realized that this effect has just gone because they fixed it during the spacewalk. So everything went back to normal, and then basically they could restore the full power capability of the International Space Station. But because it was related to Tim Peake, and later I was lucky enough to meet him at the Royal Aeronautical Society, organized a lecture, and he was there, so I took this very photograph with me and I asked him to sign it because that became my personal memory about it. So yes, in a nutshell, this is exactly what I wanted to show you about the International Space Station. And finally, I would like to show you a video just to close this talk. The main character is going to be Chris Hadfield. I think probably a lot of you are familiar with the name. He's a Canadian astronaut with a mustache, and he made a music video up in the station. I hope we can hear the music, but it's David Bowie's Space Oddity.
Ground control to Major Tom. Lock your Soyuz hatch and put your helmet on. 10. Ground control to Major Tom. 7, 6. Commencing countdown, engines on. Detach from station and may God's love be with you. This is ground control to Major Tom. You've really made the grade. And the papers want to know whose shirts you wear. But it's time to guide the capsule